Comrades, welcome. This is a nicer group than was at the Republican debate in Las Vegas tonight. You look at that group of candidates on the stage and you understand why they have roulette. I know who I'd bet on, but never mind. 2 weeks from tonight, we do Storm Center, which is another Bette Davis movie. It's about a librarian in the Midwest under siege by McCarthyists, and it gives me the opportunity to talk about not only the McCarthyist attack on libraries in America during the McCarthy era, but the current attack on libraries. Whether you know it or not only is their spending being cut horribly. I was downtown Sunday in downtown LA, and the Los Angeles Library wasn't even open. And that was one of their big user days, because that's when people are off and can go to the library. So, but there's other things that we'll learn about the libraries 2 weeks from tonight. The other thing, I just want to express again my thanks to the Art Theater for hosting this for us. It's been renovated beautifully. These seats are very comfortable. They keep the place nice and clean, and they have nice coffee shops and things that you can participate in. So thank you, Art Theater. Thirdly, I want to thank Eva for the email. She caught me. Frankie Lane did not sing "Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling" in the movie. He made it a big hit after the movie, but it was Tex Ritter that made it famous inside the movie. And of course, yes.
What was the significance of burning barn?
Well, we have barn burners. And barn burners are people who are ideological enthusiasts. And I think it's a metaphor for being a barn burner. But also I think it was just a great dramatic moment. And maybe Carl Foreman wanted Gary Cooper burned in the barn because he had cooperated with the House Un-American Activities Committee. Okay. In 1950, the American Broadcasting Company put out a list called Red Channels, and this became the Blacklist Bible. They listed 151 writers, directors, and performers who were to be blacklisted and had communist affiliations. Just to get you back in the mood of the paranoia that went on, I wanted to read some of the names on the list. Obviously, I don't have time for all 151, but here are some of these people. Leonard Bernstein, Aaron Copland, Alfred Drake. Alfred Drake, I mean, kiss me, Kate. Howard Duff. Now, Howard Duff shouldn't be put on this list. He had to put up with Ida Lupino. I mean, come on. Jose Ferrer, John Garfield. And I'll talk about John Garfield in the last lecture that we have. He had a very sad life at the end. Ruth Gordon. Uta Hagen. She was the first Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf on Broadway. Dashiell Hammett, who we'll talk about tonight. Lillian Hellman, who we'll talk about tonight. Lena Horne. Judy Holliday. Marcia Hunt, who's still alive at 90 up in Hollywood. Burl Ives. Gypsy Rose Lee. Arthur Miller. Burgess Meredith, Zero Mostel, Dorothy Parker, Edward G. Robinson, Pete Seeger, Artie Shaw, who knew, Howard K. Smith, Orson Welles, and my favorite, the first woman to win the new category of supporting actress in 1936 was put on the list in 1950. Gail Sondergaard. So, the other thing we need to know about tonight is that in 1848, there were a number of democratic revolutions across Europe, and it gave power to the middle class. And Hegel was the philosopher, Friedrich Hegel, was very excited about this. It was like their, Arab Spring thing. And so he wrote very optimistically about freedom coming to the middle class. 10 years later, Karl Marx started writing about bringing freedom to the proletariat. Workers of the world unite. Let's look for ideologies masking real intents and subcontexts and so on and so forth. In 1917, Lenin came up with his own slogan, which was "the land to the people." And that was the communist movement in the Soviet Union once Lenin solidified power. And then in 1923 and 1924, after Lenin passed away, Stalin took over, and of course his slogan was "me for dictator." It kind of ruined the whole communist thing. Stalin inflicted a lot of harm, as we know. I'm of Ukrainian descent, and I know about the Holocaust that was visited on the Ukrainian people, where they simply surrounded villages, starved them out, and when they were all dead, they raised a black flag, and Russians came in, took the bodies away, and took over the city. There were millions of people killed by Stalin in that way, millions sent to Siberia to live in prison. He purged his own party of people because he became so paranoid, and then he cut, in 1939, a deal with Hitler, you know, if he hadn't done enough evil. And then in 1941, because Hitler was crazier than Stalin, he invaded Russia, and suddenly the enemy of our enemy was our friend, and we had an ally. Now, the reason this background is important is because Lillian Hellman, the subject of tonight's lecture, was an avowed Stalinist, and it got her into a lot of trouble. She never apologized for Stalin, and this was one of the reasons that Lillian Hellman had so many problems with the House Un-American Activities Committee. One of the most important meetings that ever took place in Lillian Hellman's life is when she met Dashiell Hammett. Dashiell Hammett would go on to become the author of the Maltese Falcons and the Thin Man series, writing as a scriptwriter. She was born in New Orleans to Jewish parents in 1905. She studied at New York University on Washington Square and also at Columbia, but she did not finish her degree at either one of those institutions. She started working for magazines in 1925, and on November 22nd, 1930, she attended a party in New York thrown by Darrell F. Zanuck. And there she met Dashiell Hammett. They fell in love. Hellman divorced her husband of the time, and they carried on a relationship for the rest of their lives. Dashiell Hammett was the creator of Sam Spade and the creator of 6 successful novels, as I said, including The Maltese Falcon, and he mentored Lillian Hellman to her own fame as a playwright, whose plays then became movies. He never wrote another novel, but he did work on Hollywood scripts, often leaving Lillian behind in New York to work on her plays. Hellman's first success was The Children's Hour, about 2 lesbians in a boarding school. Hammett gave her the concept that allowed her to finish the controversial and successful play. It was eventually made into a movie starring Audrey Hepburn and Shirley MacLaine. It would take a long time for the play to make it into a film because Hollywood had agreed to impose its own production code administered by the Hays Office in exchange for the government giving up its right to censor films, which they had begun doing, as I pointed out before, in World War I. Around the same time, Hellman and Hammett became members of the Communist Party of the United States of America. He began in his letters, and you can look at them. One of my graduate students is his granddaughter, Julie Rivette, and they've just come out with a book about all of his letters, the letters of Dashiell Hammett. And it's fun to read these letters because he addresses them to, the letters he addresses to Lillian Hellman, he addresses her as Lilishka, which is a little communist joke. By 1937, membership in the Communist Party required a commitment to civil rights and an end to fascism and repression of workers. Hammett and Hellman became Stalinists. They believed in his 5-year plans and his desire to convert the world to communism. In 1937, the communists supported the Republican side in the war with the fascists in Spain, which General Franco eventually won because he had the support of Hitler and Mussolini. You all remember For Whom the Bells Toll. It's a movie written by based on the novel by Hemingway about that war. Most importantly, in the same year, 1937, Dashiell Hammett and Lillian Hellman helped form the Screenwriters Guild in an attempt to break the iron grip of studios. In the fall of 1937, Hellman became pregnant with Hammett's child, but she terminated the pregnancy. Hammett divorced his wife, but did not marry Hellman, though their relationship continued. Hellman was notoriously unfaithful to Hammett. Another blot on her record at this time was her avid defense of Stalin's purge trials. Hammett was doing well as a screenwriter for the Thin Man series, which starred William Powell and Myrna Loy, as you all know. In the summer of 1938, Hammett's drinking caught up with him. His weight dropped to 125 pounds, and he suffered a physical collapse. Hellman took him in New York. In 1939, Hellman found a new lover, Ralph Ingersoll, a naive idealist. The ever-tolerant Hammett befriended him, and they started a communist magazine together. The Little Foxes, the subject of tonight's movie, began as a play, and it premiered on Broadway in 1939, starring, does anybody remember who did the play? Tallulah Bankhead, the daughter of a senator from Alabama. In the meantime, Hammett and Hellman wrote and signed, quote, "In defense of the Bill of Rights," a notice which attacked the Dies Committee, the forerunner of the House Un-American Activities Committee. It also protested the suppression of the Communist Party. It was signed by many prominent educators and scholars, including Theodore Dreiser and Clifford Odets. However, when Stalin signed the Non-Aggression Pact with Hitler in 1939 and they invaded Poland, the Communist Party of America was damaged. Hellman and Hammett went back to work. She guaranteed producer Hal Wallace that Hammett would finish the script for Watch on the Rhine, or she would cover his salary. Hammett then turned all control of his affairs over to Hellman. Things turned around for the Communist Party and Hellman when Hitler invaded Russia in 1941 and then Japan attacked the United States. In 1944, while Hammett served in the Aleutian Islands in the Army, Hammett's play The Searching Wind opened on Broadway, and her reputation seemed restored. However, she was denied a passport to go to London. And though her play received 7 votes of the 14 members of the Critics' Circle, a majority was required to win, so no award was given for the 1944 season to a Broadway play. Hellman then took a 5-month trip, which included 4 months in the Soviet Union and a series of travel articles for Collier's magazine. When she returned home in March of 1945, she discovered that she was under investigation, and so were many members of the Communist Party who served in the armed forces. Nonetheless, in 1946, Hal Wallace produced the movie version of The Searching Wind, adapted by Hellman for the screen. In 1947, Hellman protested the treatment of the Hollywood 10 by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Her protests continued when they were fired in 1949 and sent to prison in 1950. The programs Hammett was writing for radio were then canceled. In 1950, he was called before Congress to describe his role in providing bail money for the accused communists. He refused to cooperate and was sent to federal prison in Kentucky. Hellman was outraged. When she was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, she read a statement which contained the following passage, quote, "To hurt innocent people, whom I knew many years ago, in order to save myself, is to me inhumane and indecent and dishonorable. I cannot and will not cut my conscience to fit the year's fashions, even though I long ago came to the conclusion that I was not a political person and could have no comfortable place in any political group." Unquote. She was immediately blacklisted and then returned to New York. Hellman's success on Broadway continued when Frederick March and his wife Florence Eldridge starred in Hellman's play The Autumn Garden, which opened in March of 1951 during the height of the McCarthy era. FBI files show that the agency, the FBI, broke into Hellman's home in upstate New York. She had a farm in upstate New York. And then into her apartment in New York City, both without warrants. They went after her on income evasion charges, and she was eventually forced to sell her farm to pay the back taxes. Released from jail, Hammett was a broken man who Hellman cared for. In 1953, he was called before the McCarthy Senate Investigating Committee and again refused to testify. In 1955, Hellman's The Lark, starring Julie Harris and Christopher Plummer, opened on Broadway. Close friend Leonard Bernstein composed the music for the play. In return, Hellman helped Bernstein with his operetta, the book for the operetta, Candide, in 1957. Hammett tragically died of lung cancer in 1960. Hellman took refuge in her script for the movie, Toys in the Attic. In 1969, she published her memoirs, and then in 1973, she published Pentimento, a fictional account of her trip to Russia that was eventually made into the movie Julia, starring Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave. In 1976, she wrote Scoundrel Time about the blacklists of artists. Controversial to the end, Lillian Hellman died at the age of 79 in 1984. The Little Foxes is one of those movies that came out in 1939, the greatest year in the history of motion pictures. That was the year of Gone with the Wind, of Goodbye, Mr. Chips, of The Wizard of Oz, of so many other great pictures. It is the chronicle of hatred and greed among the members of the Hubbard family, and it was partly based on Hellman's own memories of the South. The Goldwyn Studio had purchased the rights for the play after its success on Broadway. Arthur Kober, Hellman's former husband, Dorothy Parker, and Alan Campbell were hired to do the final work on Hellman's script for William Wyler's film adaptation. The film, starring Bette Davis, Herbert Marshall, and Teresa Wright, received 9 Academy Award nominations, but it didn't win a single Oscar. The only time that's happened recently was the movie The Turning Point. It was nominated for 11 Oscars and didn't get any. That would be a tough night for anybody. The Little Foxes is an allegory, so I want you to watch it closely. It's a story that has alternate meanings, okay? It's like a parable. It's about greed and treachery. Regina Giddens, played by Bette Davis, is pure evil. On the metaphysical level, the film exposes the greed of the New South, represented by her, by Regina, and her brothers, and the grace and honor of the Old South, represented by Horace Giddens, played by Herbert Marshall. The plot is a pure Marxist dialectic, with Horace representing the thesis and Regina representing the antithesis, and their daughter, played by Teresa Wright, representing the synthesis. So as you watch this, you can see the Marxist dialectic unfolding. You can see the opposition to capitalism. You can see the attempt to reveal hidden ideologies and subtexts that people don't say what they mean, and you have to figure out what they mean by putting together the fragments of their statements.